Welcome, welcome. Let's take a look at our agenda for climate change and international education. Are carbon offsets the answer? Awesome. Okay, here we are. So we'll do some quick introductions for myself and my co-presenters. We'll take a look at what carbon offsetting actually is and why it's important. We'll provide you some definitions of some of the key phrases and terms you might see in the world of carbon offsetting. We'll look at some common pitfalls and then some best practices and ideas, and have time at the end for discussion so that you all can meet each other and chat through some ideas for how you could apply it to your own situations at your own institutions. So now, who in the world is talking to you? To start off our introductions, we just want to say we're not experts in carbon offsetting. With the other members of the Climate Justice Working Group, many of them are here today with us. We became interested in this topic and decided to dive in, and then thought we should probably share our learnings with all of you. So that we've done a lot of this research just in the last month or so, learning about this topic, and wanted to share it with you. So my name is Amy Marcus. I'm joining from Walnut Creek, California, which is the traditional land of the Bay Miwok people. I currently work in credentials and accreditations at HubSpot, but spent nearly 10 years working in international and higher education before this role. I joined CANI this past winter to stay connected in the international ed community and to get more involved in climate action. And I'll pass it off to Suzanne.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, Amy, for that introduction. I am Suzanne Williver. I'm currently Associate Director for Outreach and Academic Initiatives at Temple University at the Education Abroad and Overseas Campuses Office. We are located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which stands on the traditional homelands of the Lenni Lenape people. And as part of this land acknowledgement, I want to just take a moment to reflect on my need and our need to be stewards of the land upon which we reside, which is part of the reason why we're here today. I have been working in international education for 8 years. My academic background is in art history. So as Amy said, not an expert in climate change, but I have been involved in our sustainability initiatives here in the Education Abroad office, and I joined CANI this past year to become more involved in confronting this crisis from within our sector in international ed. Thank you all for being here today. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Jake.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Jake Graff. I'm currently a global program advisor for AIFS Abroad. Just started there last fall, around the same time I actually joined CANI and kind of started jumping in with sustainability a little bit more. I am joining from Littleton, Colorado, just south of Denver. Acknowledges land of the Guala Sioux, Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute people. I, like I said, joined in the winter of last year. Just a lot of personal and a little bit of past professional experience working with sustainability and international education. So was just really, really excited to jump in and kind of loop it back into work a little bit more as I started a new position. So happy to be here and happy to chat with you all today.
Awesome. Now we also want to know who else is in the room with us. So if you haven't already, please introduce yourselves in the chat with your name, your professional focus or organization, and where you're joining us from. Jake, take it away.
Cool. So we are going to start with a little bit of conversation for you all. So we aren't just going to be, talking at you the entire time. Really, we're just interested in a couple of questions to kick it off here. The first one here you'll see, and you can just respond in the chat for this. When you think about offsetting, kind of what comes to mind, if you have any past experience with it, or if you've done any of your own kind of learning or research, if you've kind of been involved with offsetting initiatives or projects, that type of thing. So just encourage you. I know the chat looks like it's blowing up with introductions and questions now, but we'll just take just a second here for you all to just kind of think about it a little bit. And then we can, I guess, kind of just we can read some of these off as we go. So I see planting trees here, which is, a big part. Recapturing carbon sequestration, changing habits, money and fees, and who's going to pay. We'll do just a couple more here, and then we have another one for you as well. Doing useful things, projects intended to capture carbon emitted through one's activity, the two part here, being useful things, other things aren't useful with offsetting, reducing emissions, paying for something you're doing wrong. Yeah, these are all great, and we will definitely discuss all of these ideas throughout the conversation today. So we can go to the next slide, and we have another kind of discussion question for you all. When you think about your institution, how your institution should be addressing climate change, what comes to mind? So again, if you have any experience with this, if you've done any types of offsetting projects or initiatives or other things, kind of addressing climate change, what kind of comes to mind for what your institution should be doing? Divesting from capitalism, delayed intentions, making sure travel is used purposefully, better waste management for sure, divesting from fossil fuel industry. All right, so those will kind of continue. You are definitely, welcome to engage in the chat throughout the conversation. We don't have to, just move on quickly and stop talking about it. We can go ahead into the next slide then, just to establish some definitions of, common topics and themes that we're going to be discussing today. So we'll just briefly go over each of these, kind of what they kind of mean, what they kind of refer to in the idea of offsetting and how they relate to offsetting. So I will just kind of jump in with brief definitions. Climate justice, first and foremost, that is what this working group presenting is kind of all about. Climate justice really does kind of start with that connection between climate change and civil rights, and really the understanding that different groups are impacted differently by climate change. This can happen, from the micro level, the macro level, and the micro level, from ideas of global north actions and practices negatively impacting the global south. Could be on a much smaller scale of a family from a marginalized demographic or a community only have access to housing in areas with poor air quality or located in a floodplain. So it's really, a kind of very wide scoping term, just to kind of talk about that understanding of climate change, climate justice, and civil rights. Offsetting, the main star of our conversation today, is really just about balancing, compensating, neutralizing carbon emissions from a specific activity, usually by paying into a program or a project that has the goal of reducing emissions somewhere else. Offsetting investments are typically made in more of an environmental, climate, or nature restoration type of project. Again, this is primarily tree planting. This is kind of a main discussion that we'll have today as well about tree planting, but there are other ways of kind of offsetting emissions through other renewable energy development types of things. Offsets are usually sold as units. Most common, I think, is price per ton of carbon dioxide. And then something important to note for offsets is that they don't always pull carbon dioxide already in the atmosphere. Some are just emissions that have been or would be avoided elsewhere. So again, it's not necessarily like reducing carbon. It may just be making up for carbon. I think in international education, this is usually big with flights and kind of the emission from flights. So just kind of making up for it that way. Onsetting and insetting, we've had a lot of discussion about kind of what these terms mean and how they are kind of different from one another. Onsetting is, very similar to offsetting in that the goal is to remove or, sequester carbon from the atmosphere. Usually applies to closer to home initiatives, which we'll talk about today as well. Organizations usually kind of oversee these more closely, have more involvement. Sometimes they are, developed in-house. Onsetting also usually has a stronger kind of educational or social or community component. Again, what this might look like for international education is during or post-program initiatives where program participants are learning about their environmental impact in their host community, in their host countries, or how to bring those green practices home and kind of continue that more green or sustainable lifestyle. Insetting is very kind of closely tied to the idea of onsetting, and especially that idea of building programs or initiatives that are closer to home. It's really about kind of looping offsetting or onsetting or, just climate actions in general back into an organization or a company. From the business side, this is really, kind of a way for a company to keep their money inside the company. So climate action projects and initiatives, the funding kind of stays within, and this also really kind of strengthens or reinforces the company's commitment to climate action, kind of, again, keeping it in-house, and really just backing up their commitment to sustainable practices. Reduction is really not the main idea behind offsetting. It's important to note here that offsetting, again, is kind of targeting removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere or accounting for future emissions. It's not really a reduction in the overall or the initial CO2 emissions that we're making. So reduction is an important theme here, an important topic, but definitely not the goal of offsetting, which I think is a main part of our conversation as well. Greenwashing is another term that kind of came up during our discussions of offsetting. A common marketing ploy really designed to make products seem more sustainable than they really are. It's essentially a way that customers companies are trying to convince customers to make that they're making positive environmental choices. Usually it's through, eco-conscious wording or packaging designed to convince, shoppers or consumers that a product is more natural, wholesome, free of toxins, that type of thing. Common examples of this are, using green in the title of a product, or actually, using actual green or natural looking packaging for products doesn't actually mean anything changed, or, the product is any actually greener than competitors' products, but they just kind of market it this way because it does certainly appeal to an audience who is conscious of this type of thing. The idea behind regenerativity then is really about putting back into the environment, making sure that efforts provide positive impacts on the environment, impacts on biodiversity, local communities, that type of thing. This kind of, definitely goes hand in hand with the idea of climate justice and, making sure that efforts are providing kind of like a healing effect from climate action or efforts. And some offsetting programs don't really get this far. We'll definitely discuss this a little bit more and kind of that idea of regenerativity. And then the final term for you here, nature-based solutions, again, kind of loops back into that convergence of climate change and civil rights, harnessing the power of nature to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and also helping us to adapt to the impacts of climate change. Again, especially concerning kind of biodiversity and our impact on environments. Nature-based solutions, really, this is most commonly seen, again, in forests and, forest regeneration types of initiatives. There are others, though, other types of landscapes and environments, peatlands, mangroves, wetlands, savannas, coral reefs, all types of different landscapes where there are kind of nature-based solutions and initiatives, again, just kind of respecting local diversity, biodiversity, and really building that into efforts and making sure that they're impactful.
Thanks so much, Jake. I think it's really helpful to start there with those definitions, so we all kind of have a even playing field and understand what we're talking about. So there are lots of organizations out there working hard to offset carbon emissions around the world, but unfortunately, more than a few of them have really missed the mark to the point that they've done some real damage. So I thought we'd take a look at just a couple of examples. We don't want to spend too much time on these because it can get really bummer, it can get really depressing, and we definitely want to spend time on those solutions and those ideas that you can take home with you. So I know someone mentioned tree planting in the chat. Many of us have heard about tree planting initiatives, which when done right can have a truly positive impact, right? Trees capture carbon, they lower temperatures for entire neighborhoods. They can provide families with additional sources of income depending on the type of tree, and their roots help strengthen soil by keeping it from washing away during rainfall. But unfortunately, some of these tree planting initiatives involve really shady companies breaking rules and disrespecting local communities. So I know you all mentioned a number of different kinds of carbon offsetting in the chat. I'm just looking at tree planting for the moment because this is really one of the most well-known approaches. So in just one example in Uganda, researchers go so far as to describe a case of carbon offsetting as carbon colonialism and a neoliberal land grab. So they argue that carbon has been commodified and fetishized by global carbon markets through carbon offset programs, making sales of carbon offsets profitable and making those who purchase the offsets feel like they're doing a really good thing for the planet through these payments. So Green Resources, a company from Norway, works in carbon offsetting and renewable energy, among other things. and has contracted with a number of different African nations to plant millions of trees and manage land, making it actually the largest plantation forestry operation on the African continent. So what researchers found in Uganda was that green resources was actually degrading local ecosystems, creating further dependence on outside investment, displacing communities, and disrupting local economies. Oof. So the company has been accused of disregarding local laws and basic human rights, as well as physically destroying crops, housing, and trading centers. Some even say that burial sites were destroyed to create space for planting additional trees. Essentially, they committed to planting X number of trees and did whatever it took to do so, regardless of the actual consequences on the local human or ecosystem. And then in another example, a New York Times article describes the work of Total Energies, a French oil and gas company operating in the Republic of Congo. Their work there was a huge endeavor that seems quite impressive on the surface, planting trees on 40,000 hectares of land, sequestering over 10 million tons of carbon dioxide over 20 years. That sounds huge and awesome, right? But scientists say that Total Energies plans to plant the wrong kind of trees, ones that wouldn't naturally occur in that area. So this sort of project can destroy biodiversity and threaten water supplies. And on the next slide, we'll take a look at some of the issues to keep an eye out for in these kinds of projects. So before we go into this list, I want to acknowledge that a lot of these destructive practices are really difficult to identify or track from afar, right? As a single individual, you can't just be expected to know whether a tree planting project is planting the right kinds of trees in the right places. And that's okay. We're sharing these examples just to emphasize that purchasing carbon offsets isn't necessarily the panacea that we want it to be. So first, we obviously don't want to displace local residents in order to plant trees. And we also don't want to be denying locals access to land that they've been farming or using to graze their animals on for generations. This disrupts people's safety, health, and livelihoods. Too many tree planting initiatives plant thousands of the same kind of tree across a wide area, which creates a monoculture. But ecosystems thrive with a diversity of species and truly struggle without it. And along these same lines, some initiatives plant non-native species, like I mentioned earlier, which just throws whole ecosystems out of whack, right? The tree won't thrive, and the plants and animals around it won't know what to do with it, so to speak. And then some tree planting programs don't even plan on letting the trees stay there. They plant and grow the trees for the carbon offsets for a few years and then cut them down and export them to higher income countries for use in like construction and home renovations. Many companies running initiatives in lower income countries lower the bar when it comes to respecting local laws. And as I think many of you know, this is pretty common across a lot of different industries, not just carbon offsetting. But they lower the bar regarding laws, human rights of residents, and basic social responsibilities. And corrupt or even just desperate or dysfunctional governments turn a blind eye to some of these issues because the initiatives bring much needed revenue to the area, right? And finally, a somewhat odd example from the case of Uganda, Green Resources described human activities like beekeeping, small-scale farming, and animal husbandry as carbon leakage because those activities are taking up land that could otherwise be used for new trees planted, which would be absorbing more carbon. So never mind that these human activities are regenerative and provide livelihoods, the thinking is that it detracts from the company's tree planting initiatives. Basically, it takes something essential and regenerative and labels it as destructive. Not great. So this can all seem really overwhelming and scary, I know. Again, we're only sharing these examples to provide a bit of nuance, to show that carbon offsetting isn't so easy a solution. There are, of course, organizations out there doing this well. So it's just about doing your research and taking some of the actions that Suzanne will describe for us next.
Thank you, Amy. And even though I've seen you go through this before in these examples before, I feel that sense of climate anxiety thinking about that. We have some comments in the chat. Please give us something positive to walk away with. So, we know that all of these examples of failures and what not to do can enhance this sense of climate anxiety and leave us all wondering, like, what can we do? And we want to make sure that you leave with some ideas for doing that today. First, it can be really easy to just go purchase your offsets and kind of forget it. Like, I've done my duty and now I can go about living my life without any changes. And so we want to emphasize that offsetting is and should be kind of a last resort. We'll come back to that later. But when you do decide to purchase offsets for what you're not where you're not able to reduce, research those offsetting providers. Ask if you have a sustainability office, ask them for recommendations. Our sustainability office at Temple has recommended some resources for helping to verify projects, and we can drop some of those recommendations in the chat for you. And choose something that's meaningful to you. One great way to do that is to go local. You can either create your own, perhaps in conjunction with your sustainability office or local partners, or get involved in something that exists locally. Those local projects can help ensure that projects are implemented ethically and in ways that are beneficial to the local community. Engaging in smaller, more local projects can also help to encourage or allow for student participation and learning. And staying small can also help avoid the development of monopolies and contribute to the local economy. So when you're doing that closer to home, making use of your own partnerships, you can be up close and see how the projects are actually being implemented, which can be really helpful. So we did bring in a couple of examples to share with you today. The first one, and I want to thank our colleague who's here today, Noreen Lucy, is a member of our Climate Justice Working Group, for providing some great examples from Europe for us, and we selected a couple of those to share with you today. The first one is called Pocket Forests, and I really love this example so much because it was started by a writer and an event planner during the pandemic. So like us, these two women who were not climate experts, but they were concerned about the loss of biodiversity, the negative impact on our industrial food systems on wildlife, and they were tired of feeling paralyzed by climate change. So they really wanted to be able to do something. So they learned from other examples around Europe. They started noticing places around Dublin where you could potentially fit, that would be a good fit for planting native forests. They started researching these other examples. They found a Japanese method that was being used in India, and they began partnering with local organizations to plant these pocket forests. They're partnering with local schools, local organizations, they're getting additional funding, and they're growing. And this is really important to note that they do not advertise themselves as an offsetting organization. So you might be able to find examples in your local area that you can partner with that aren't calling themselves offsetting organizations. Might make it more challenging to sort of calculate, we want to be able to calculate where exactly we're offsetting. That might be more challenging. But these smaller projects can be really great resources for making a difference in your local community. The second example is focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and restoring the carbon capacity of peatlands in this Northwestern Europe region. Peatlands are so important, especially in this region, because they're so plentiful there. And because peatlands have the capability to capture carbon so well, so long as they remain wet. When they become degraded and they dry out, they can have the opposite effect, releasing carbon into the atmosphere again. And it's important to note that drained organic soil emits 2 times the greenhouse gas emissions of aviation. So maintaining those peatlands and keeping them wet is really, really critical. So this is, again, another example of a partnership that's invested in local projects. In this case, it is regional institutions of higher learning and nonprofit organizations that are working together to develop the science and the solutions to be able to implement these projects, but done so locally and with regional needs in mind. Another example comes from our friends in Pennsylvania here at Penn State, planting trees. We've already heard mentioned a few times about planting trees as an offsetting option. It is, I think, the most common form that we hear about of offsetting. But here's an example of how a local professor, he is an environmental and earth science professor at Penn State. he purchased a plot of land out near the university and was trying to restore it. It had previously been overly farmed, done really poorly. They planted invasive species. They were storing discarded equipment on other parts of the land and had really done some damage. So he had bought this land to try to restore it and remove those invasive species, replant native trees. And he found an organization, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, which had set a goal to plant 10 million trees in Pennsylvania before 2025. So he partnered with that local organization that already had a goal, involved students at Temple, added in the complementary coursework on sustainability, and the students came and it was part of their learning experience. So you might be able to tap into resources at your institution, at a partner institution, and find a local organization like this that would already make a great partner for you. So great initiative happening at Penn State. I should mention too, Penn State also recently won the Forum on Education Abroad's award for sustainability this year, which is really great. So at Temple, we've been talking about creating a social impact project. We are situated in a North Philadelphia neighborhood. We're interested in creating a project that would allow us to create some benefit for the local neighborhood. So our sustainability office has been in discussions with the Energy Authority of Philadelphia to invest in projects that would implement weatherization improvements to local homes. So that might mean improving insulation, replacing windows, switching out gas stoves for more efficient stoves, or even putting solar panels on local school rooftops. So this again is it's a type of project that the Energy Authority of Philadelphia already knows how to do that. They have systems in place for doing that. We can partner with them, invest our offsetting money in a local project that we know will make an impact, a social impact on our local community. This type of project does cost more than just paying to plant trees somewhere. But the social impact of it, the social benefit of it offers an opportunity not only to make a difference in your local community, but to involve students in the learning and potentially the project itself, if that's possible. We are hoping to involve students in these projects. You know, COVID has thrown a wrench in things for us. So that's still TBD, but we're hoping once this gets off the ground that we'll be able to involve students in actually implementing these projects. So those are just a couple of ideas for types of offsetting projects. And it's important to mention, to remember, as I mentioned earlier, that offsetting should really just be a small piece of the solution for all of us and really a last resort. It's most important to reduce first. So we need to really think about all the ways that we can do that. At Temple, at the Education Abroad office, we've just launched our own Temple Global Green Initiative. We are planning to be carbon neutral by 2030 in alliance with the County Accord and the Paris Accord. So we are looking at all aspects of our work, right? So you can consider your office operations. Can you do meatless or less meat events? Can you close the office for a couple of days a year when the students are not around and reduce the amount of power that you're using? Can you think twice before you send something to print? When you're thinking about your marketing, do you really need those hefty brochures with all of the courses in them that become outdated before they even go to the printer? Or can we drive students to the web to get that information? Where can you reduce student and especially staff travel and make smart decisions about when and where you need to travel? And different ways that you can think about reduction within your programming through various partnerships and within your student learning. A lot of the examples that we just went through a few minutes ago emphasize collaboration. Collaborate with your sustainability office, your campus partners, whether at home or abroad, other organizations in your area, in your region that already exist. Create those alliances, right? SDG 17. And then in terms of student learning, link the before, during, and after program elements. How can you incorporate sustainability practices and learning into pre-departure orientation? Introduce students to the ways that climate change is impacting their host country. What government policies have those local governments implemented? How have people responded to them? How do others live, in some cases, speaking from the US, more sustainably already than we do? Most people do already. So we can learn a lot from our host countries in terms of sustainability. Where can you implement on-site courses, either creating your own or making use of those that exist with your partners, get students involved in the local community, and then creating or cross-promoting return student events. Once your students get back, how can they continue that learning? So we are, one thing we are doing here, last week we hosted a how to compost event with our sustainability office. We have a beautiful community gardens. It's student run. Experienced students from the gardens taught us all how to compost. And it was a really successful event. A lot of folks came, and I think we will do it again. And that was an event, again, it was created by the sustainability office, and we co-sponsored it. So you don't always have to add, an additional burden to everyone's already so busy. How can you make use of those partnerships to enhance student learning? So hopefully these ideas have gotten your wheels turning and given you some food for thought. We are going to kind of open this up to a discussion to hear from all of you. If you have want to share projects you are already working on or ideas you have, I'm going to kick it back over to Jake to lead us in that discussion.
Yeah, so you'll see the discussion questions here, very loosely based, conversation. We just want to kind of open it up for you all to kind of share and engage with each other. So we will put these in the chat as well, so everyone has them, but we will just kind of divide everyone up into breakout rooms. Please pick someone to kind of share out. We are kind of setting aside really the rest of the time today for you all to just kind of talk with each other. And then if we do have that time for a share out, we'll just kind of ask that someone from each group just kind of volunteers to share your main takeaways from the discussion. So you'll see the questions here. What has your experience with offsetting been? What has your knowledge of offsetting prior to this session? What was your knowledge of offsetting prior to this session? And then how might you implement some of these practices in your home institution? So with that, we can go ahead and divide up into discussion groups. We have, just about 8 minutes left, so I think we can just, spend the rest of the time just kind of debriefing what everyone kind of talked about, main points, or, if anything particularly interesting kind of jumped out during conversations. So really open from here. Anyone, welcome to unmute and share out with the group.
I'll go. I am unmuted. And our group talked a lot about co-sponsorship of events on campus. So in light of that pre-departure, post-return, how to get students coming to the events. And Suzanne shared a really neat idea that they do for a global conference when it's not during COVID times. And then they have students present on a variety of topics, but also there was a climate session, I believe, and a panel discussion, 2 different panel discussions that happened conveniently during International Education Week. We don't at Bucknell University. It's hard during International Education Week in November to get people to participate. It's always right before Thanksgiving. Just the timing hardly ever works very well. And we've struggled with getting people to attend, but I think co-sponsoring with another department, other faculty, et cetera, especially if it's with faculty where they have the students, incentivized to come to some of these discussions. It's very nice.
Does anyone else have any takeaways?
If you want, I could share a few thoughts from our group. We talked a little bit about student mobility and study abroad, and the thinking about what is better in terms of climate impact, long-term mobility, shorter mobility. Yeah, of course, it seems to make sense to go for longer stays abroad. But then that may be at odds with concerns about inclusiveness and making sure study abroad opportunities are available for everyone. But then, my colleagues in the group said that actually it might be the reverse, that the longer students stay in another country, the more, costs they may save at home from tuition and they can give up their apartment or something. And actually that it's easier to get a job abroad if you go for longer. So that could be a good thing to promote, having longer stays abroad. We also talked a bit about the organization I'm involved in, which is the EAIE. And we organize a big conference in Europe on international education. So we talked about what we could do to promote green travel, train travel to the conference, and different kind of a bit of gamification and giving some rewards for people who choose to travel responsibly to the conference. Those are a couple of the things we brainstormed about. Does anyone want to add anything?
Love it. Thanks, Pete.
Hey, Amy, I know that Stephen had to jump off, but our group, Stephen gave a lovely example of how he works with their students and an organisation called Home Tree in Ireland, which is an educational group, and they plant native trees. And I suppose Stephen was making the point that it is an offsetting organisation, but I suppose they're not. The main point is not the offsetting of the carbon, but the mindset and the behavioural change. And the group are kind of reinforcing that idea that, you know, it's bringing the students to plant the tree, to get them thinking of the emissions and that mindset and behavioural change piece as well. So I suppose that's in addition to the offsetting and the carbon emissions. So it was a great point. We had a good chat about that. Thank you.
Yeah, I work with Stephen as well. I don't think I've met you, Noreen, but we would just to add on to that, we brought the students down. It's near the Cliffs of Moher in Ireland, and it was fascinating. We were expecting them to think, oh, great, we've offsetted all our carbon, but most of them were just getting in touch with nature and this kind of group activity and how they taught differently of the whole semester. It wasn't just that for them; it was more that for us. That was our focus, and then it completely changed. And that was at the end of the semester. We did it 2 weeks ago. So next semester, due to the weather, we'll be doing it in September. So it'll be interesting to compare semesters and to see if that mind change at the beginning of the semester is different and will that last on throughout the semester. So we'll keep you up to date.
Thank you. Any last thoughts before we wrap things up?
I just wanted to say that Tony, who just spoke a second ago, I wrote some comments about some other things he said, and he also recommended a book. So I'll put a link to that in. If anyone has any books or things like that they think, resources they think will be really helpful, add them to the chat because we can compile them into our Canny resources, and then we can also put them into our resource folder that we'll be sharing with you a little bit later today. So.
Yeah, these are all the names of the big articles that I referred to. We're going to share a link to an open Google Drive where you all can view the resources and the slides from today as well. And like Ine said, reach out to any of us with additional resources that you'd like to see in here or on the Canny website in general. And this has been so much fun. This has been such a pleasure. I think I can say that on behalf of my co-presenters. Thank you so much for joining us all today. We'll be sharing the recording out soon. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone
for organizing this.